Florida still knows how to sell a dream. Palm trees, blue water, brand new homes with pools, condo balconies facing the Gulf. Retirement communities where every day is supposed to feel like vacation. And from far away, the story still looks intact. Pull up the current numbers, and a different Florida starts to appear. In one community near Delray Beach, typical home values are down almost 19% in a year. In West Palm Beach, a massive retirement condo market is down nearly 16%. Across Southwest Florida, entire towns are sitting on hundreds, sometimes thousands of homes, waiting for buyers who are taking longer, negotiating harder, and refusing to pay yesterday's price. This is not a video about Florida becoming unlivable. People still want to live here. The weather did not disappear. The coast did not disappear. The dream did not disappear. What changed is the ownership equation. A buyer is no longer looking at one number. They are looking at the mortgage, insurance, flood risk, HOA dues, reserve requirements, repairs, assessments, and the cost of getting out if the market keeps moving against them. And when that equation gets too heavy, the first places to feel it are usually not the famous names. They are the communities built around one specific kind of buyer: the retiree, the seasonal owner, the second home buyer, the entry-level family, the person who needs the payment to work down to the last dollar. We ranked 15 Florida communities by their latest verified one-year Zillow home value declines. And number one is not some forgotten inland town. It is one of South Florida's best-known retirement communities. Number 15 is Bonita Springs. Bonita Springs sits between Fort Myers and Naples, where the Florida sales pitch is almost too easy. Warm winters, golf courses, beaches nearby, gated communities, seasonal residents arriving every year with money from somewhere colder. For a long time, that was enough. The typical Bonita Springs home is still valued at more than $500,000, but Zillow now shows that value down 6.8% from a year earlier, and homes are taking about 83 days to go pending. That is not a dead market. It is something more uncomfortable, a selective market, because Bonita Springs depends heavily on buyers who have choices, buyers who can compare one coastal community against another, buyers who do not need to move this month, buyers who can wait for insurance quotes, condo documents, inspection reports, price reductions before they make a decision. That kind of buyer does not panic. They pause. Picture someone from the Midwest looking at two homes. One has a beautiful lanai and a pool. The other costs slightly less, has newer construction, and comes with a cleaner insurance history. A few years ago, they might have rushed to secure either one. Now they can make the seller compete. Bonita Springs is still attractive. That is not the question. The question is whether attraction alone can support prices when the buyer is carrying more risk, more recurring cost, and less urgency than before. In this market, the first offer is no longer the finish line. It is the beginning of a negotiation. Number 14 is Cape Coral. Cape Coral is one of Florida's biggest housing experiments. A huge city of canals, bridges, cul-de-sacs, waterfront lots, and neighborhoods built around the idea that ordinary people could still own a piece of coastal Florida. For years, that proposition worked. Buyers could not afford Naples. They could not afford certain parts of Fort Myers. So they looked across the river, saw the canals, saw the pools, saw the boats in the water, and decided Cape Coral was their opening. Now the market is asking a harder question. Zillow puts the typical Cape Coral home value at about $338,000, down 6.8% over the past year. More than 3,200 homes are listed for sale, and Zillow shows that over 3/4 of recent sales closed below asking price. That changes the psychology of the town. When a buyer sees 20 comparable homes instead of 3, they do not chase, they compare. They ask why one house has been sitting for 80 days. They ask which roof was replaced. They ask what flood coverage costs. They ask whether the seawall, dock, pool cage, electrical panel, and windows are all actually in good condition. Cape Coral also carries a recent memory that buyers cannot ignore. Hurricane Ian brought major storm surge flooding to parts of Southwest Florida, including Cape Coral. That does not mean every Cape Coral home is damaged or undesirable. It means every serious buyer now has a longer checklist. And in a market with thousands of alternatives, every unanswered question becomes a reason to wait. Cape Coral is not losing its appeal because people stopped wanting water. It is losing pricing power because buyers have enough supply to demand proof before they pay for the view. Quick pause before number 13. If you are watching this because your own Florida neighborhood has more price cuts, more stale listings, or more back-on-market signs than it did a year ago, you are not imagining it. This channel follows the places where the brochure story and the ownership math begin to separate. Subscribe, because the next stretch of this list gets much more serious. Number 13 is Placida. Placida is one of those places that does not need a giant skyline or a national brand. It has water, quiet roads, access to the coast, and the kind of laid-back Florida setting people picture when they say they want to get away from everything. That has always been the appeal. But quiet markets can become fragile markets when buyer volume thins out. Zillow now puts the typical Placida home value around $471,000, down 7.1% from a year earlier. And in a smaller coastal community, that kind of decline matters differently. A major metro can absorb hesitation because there are thousands of buyers, renters, employers, and neighborhoods pushing against one another. A small coastal market has fewer natural backstops. Its prices often depend on outside demand. Retirees, snowbirds, second home buyers, investors, and people who simply decide they would rather own a place near the Gulf. Those buyers are not disappearing, but they are becoming much more careful. They are asking whether the home can be insured, whether it can be rented, whether the association is financially stable, whether the property has storm history, whether the carrying costs still make sense if they only use it 4 months a year. That is the danger in a lifestyle market. The buyer does not need the house to survive. They need the house to justify itself. And once the buyer starts treating a Florida retreat like a financial spreadsheet, the seller loses the emotional advantage. Placida is still beautiful, but beauty does not protect a price when the buyer can walk away and wait for the next listing. Number 12 is Fort Myers Beach. Fort Myers Beach was supposed to be one of the simplest stories in Florida real estate. You buy near the sand. You rent it when you are not there. You enjoy the winter. The water keeps the value high. Then, Hurricane Ian changed the meaning of ownership on this barrier island. The National Hurricane Center recorded storm surge inundation of roughly 10 to 15 feet above ground level on Fort Myers Beach during Ian. That history is impossible to separate from the market now. Zillow puts the typical Fort Myers Beach home value around $494,000, down 7.2% over the past year. Homes are taking about 115 days to go pending. That is nearly 4 months of waiting, and the wait tells you something. Buyers are not just purchasing square footage here. They are purchasing a risk profile. They have to think about rebuilding, insurance, elevation, construction quality, rental rules, future storms. Whether the property is truly ready or simply listed with a fresh coat of paint over a much deeper problem, the beach is still the beach. The sunsets are still there. The restaurants are reopening. The long-term recovery is still happening. But a beach home is no longer automatically treated as a carefree asset. It is a high-cost decision with a hurricane file attached. Picture a buyer standing beneath a new roof, looking at a perfect Gulf view, then opening a folder full of insurance estimates and repair documentation. That is the real market now. Fort Myers Beach is not falling because people stop loving the coast. It is falling because loving the coast and underwriting the coast are now two different things. Number 11 is Venice. Venice has long been one of the Gulf Coast's cleanest retirement stories. A charming downtown, beaches nearby, golf, restaurants, a slower pace than Sarasota, a place where people arrive from Ohio, Michigan, New York, and New Jersey, thinking they have finally found their permanent Florida chapter. But retirement markets are only stable when the next retiree can still afford the handoff. Zillow puts the typical Venice home value around $379,000, down 7.6% from a year ago. Homes are taking roughly 50 days to go pending. That may not sound dramatic. Until you remember who sets the price in a place like Venice. Many buyers are selling a home somewhere else, moving on a fixed or semi-fixed income, and trying to calculate decades of future costs before they commit. They are not just looking at the sale price. They are asking what the HOA will be next year, what insurance will be next year, what healthcare, taxes, maintenance, and reserve obligations will look like 5 years from now? And when those answers feel uncertain, buyers do not necessarily leave Florida. They simply lower the number they are willing to pay. That is what makes Venice important. This is not a boom town built around speculation. It is a mature lifestyle market built around people who need predictability, and predictability has become expensive. Venice still has the qualities that made people move there, but the market is learning that a retirement dream is only as strong as the monthly cost required to keep it. Real quick before the top 10. Tell me in the comments which Florida town you think is most exposed right now. The coastal towns, the retirement communities, or the inland areas built for first-time buyers. Because the top 10 reveals something important. The weakness is not coming from one part of Florida. It is showing up anywhere the next buyer has less money, more choices, or more questions than the seller expected. Number 10 is Lehigh Acres. Lehigh Acres was built around a very different Florida promise. Not luxury, not retirement towers, affordability. For years, it was where a family could still find a detached house, a yard, a driveway, and a price that felt possible compared with the rest of Southwest Florida. That is why the recent move matters. Zillow puts the typical Lehigh Acres home value around $284,000, down 7.7% from a year earlier. More than 1,000 homes are listed for sale, and homes are taking around 53 days to go pending. This is where the interest rate story becomes personal. In a high-end market, a buyer may have savings, investments, or a large equity check from another property. In an entry-level market, the buyer often has one thing: a monthly payment ceiling. When the mortgage rate, insurance premium, taxes, and closing costs rise together, that ceiling comes down fast. The buyer who could once qualify for a $310,000 house now qualifies for $285,000. The buyer who could stretch now cannot. And the seller does not always see that immediately. They remember what the house was worth during the surge. They remember the neighbor's sale. They remember how quickly homes used to move. But the person standing at the open house is not buying the past. They are buying a payment. Lehigh Acres is not collapsing because people no longer need affordable housing. It is under pressure because affordable is not a price tag. It is a monthly equation. Number 9 is Redington Shores. Redington Shores is the kind of place that makes Florida look unbeatable from the outside. Beach access, Gulf views, Tampa Bay nearby, a smaller coastal town where the water is not a weekend trip. It is part of the daily routine. That kind of location used to make the market feel almost untouchable, but Zillow now shows the typical Redington Shores home value at about $667,000, down the 7.9% over the past year. And expensive coastal markets have a special weakness. The buyer can choose not to buy. A primary residence is one thing. A beach condo, a second home, or a seasonal property is something else entirely. It has to compete with a lot of alternatives. A buyer can keep renting. They can choose another beach. They can move inland. They can wait until rates change. They can wait until insurance quotes come back. They can wait for the seller to blink. That is exactly what creates pressure in communities like this. The house may still look spectacular. The location may still be rare, but the demand is optional. An optional demand is the first demand to become price sensitive when the carrying costs rise. Florida's condo environment has also become more demanding after new inspection and reserve requirements for many qualifying buildings. That does not mean every condo is in trouble. It means every serious buyer has more documents to read, more questions to ask, and more reasons to discount uncertainty. Redington Shores is still selling the dream, but the dream now comes with paperwork. Number 8 is Fort Myers. Fort Myers is not just a beach town. It is a real regional city. Jobs, healthcare, shopping, neighborhoods, retirees, families, investors, and a huge range of housing types all meet here. That should make it more resilient. Instead, the numbers show how broad the reset has become. Zillow puts the typical Fort Myers home value around $310,000, down 8.4% over the past year. Nearly 3,900 homes are listed for sale. Homes are taking about 66 days to go pending, and more than 86% of recent sales closed below asking price. That is not one small pocket of weakness. That is leverage shifting toward the buyer. When inventory gets that large, buyers stop making emotional decisions. They start sorting. They sort by roof age. They sort by flood exposure. They sort by HOA dues. They sort by pool condition. They sort by proximity to work, schools, hospitals, and the coast. And once buyers can sort, they can reject. A seller with an outdated kitchen is no longer competing against a memory of 2022. They are competing against 20 other listings available this afternoon. Fort Myers still has demand. It still has employers. It still has population growth over the long run. But a city can be fundamentally desirable and still be overpriced for the buyer standing in front of it today. That is the lesson. The problem is not that Fort Myers has no buyers. The problem is that it currently has more homes asking for attention than buyers willing to overlook the flaws. Last pause before the top 7. The towns ahead are where the pattern stops looking like a normal correction and starts looking like a structural problem. These are places where the buyer pool is narrower, the inventory is heavier, or the costs attached to ownership are harder to ignore. Stay with this, because number 1 is the clearest example of the entire Florida story. Number 7 is Port Charlotte. Port Charlotte has always been one of Southwest Florida's practical choices. Not as expensive as Naples, not as flashy as some coastal enclaves, but still close enough to the water, warm enough in winter, and affordable enough to attract retirees, families, and people leaving higher-cost states. That affordability story is under strain. Zillow puts the typical Port Charlotte home value around $268,000, down 9% from a year earlier. More than 1,500 homes are listed for sale, and homes are taking about 54 days to go pending. The key word here is substitute. There are a lot of homes that can do a similar job. A buyer can choose Port Charlotte or Punta Gorda or Northport or Englewood or a different part of Fort Myers or a newer build farther inland. When every nearby market is offering discounts, the buyer gains power without even trying. That is difficult for sellers because their home may be perfectly fine. It may have a new roof, a screened lanai, a nice yard, a quiet street, but it is no longer the only reasonable choice in the price range. And when the market gives buyers too many reasonable choices, average homes have to compete harder than exceptional homes. Port Charlotte is not being abandoned. It is being repriced. The difference matters. A market can remain functional, livable, and desirable, while still forcing sellers to accept that the next buyer has better options than the last one did. Number 6 is Punta Gorda. Punta Gorda is one of those Florida places people tend to remember. The harbor, the downtown, the boating culture, the slower pace, the feeling that this is not just a subdivision, but a real community with an identity. That identity gives a market resilience, but it does not give a seller unlimited pricing power. Zillow puts the typical Punta Gorda home value around $334,000, down 9.6% over the past year. Nearly 1,400 homes are listed for sale. Homes are taking about 70 days to go pending, and almost 88% of recent sales are closing below asking price. That is the language of a buyer's market. And a buyer's market changes behavior fast. Sellers start by testing the old number, then the listing sits, then the agent suggests a small cut. Then another comparable home reduces first. Then the seller realizes they are no longer negotiating against one buyer. They are negotiating against the entire inventory. Punta Gorda has one of the strongest lifestyle identities on this list. That is why the current slide matters. When even a place with water access, a recognizable downtown, and genuine retirement appeal has to discount to move homes, the pressure is no longer limited to the weakest parts of Florida. This is what happens when the buyer starts valuing certainty more than charm. Punta Gorda has charm, but the buyer still needs the numbers to work. Number 5 is Rotonda West. Rotonda West is a deed-restricted community near Florida's Gulf Coast, built around a highly recognizable pattern of residential circles, golf courses, waterways, and neighborhoods designed for people who wanted a quieter Florida lifestyle. It was never trying to be Miami. It was trying to be manageable, a place where a retiree or remote buyer could own a house, enjoy the weather, and live without the intensity of a major city. But manageable is becoming more expensive. Zillow puts the typical Rotonda West home value around $345,000, down 10% over the past year. More than 80% of recent sales are closing below asking price. That is a major shift, because communities like Rotonda West often depend on buyers who are looking for one very specific package: a house, a golf-oriented lifestyle, nearby water, lower density, and a feeling of escape. The trouble is that the buyer has to be convinced the total cost of that escape is still reasonable. Maintenance, insurance, association rule, roof condition, storm preparation, landscaping, utilities. Everything that looks small in an online listing becomes real after closing, and buyers are no longer treating those costs as background noise. They are using them to negotiate. The community itself still has real appeal. That is why homes are still selling. But the market is telling sellers something they do not want to hear. The next buyer is not paying for the Florida lifestyle in the abstract. They are pricing every obligation attached to it. Number 4 is Englewood. Englewood sits in one of the most difficult positions in Florida housing. It is coastal enough to attract lifestyle demand, but it is not so limited or so famous that buyers have no alternatives. That means it has to compete. Zillow puts the typical Englewood home value around $324,000, down 10% over the past year. About 665 homes are listed for sale. Homes are taking around 76 days to go pending, and nearly 88% of recent sales have closed below asking price. 76 days is a long time to sit in a market where the seller expected a quick move, and the longer a listing sits, the more visible its weakness becomes. Every buyer asks the same question: what is wrong with it? Sometimes the answer is nothing. The home may simply be priced for a market that no longer exists. That is what makes Englewood such an important warning. A seller may still believe they are offering a coastal Florida bargain, but the buyer is comparing it against dozens of other coastal Florida bargains, all with different insurance histories, different roof ages, different proximity to water, and different sellers willing to negotiate. The market does not need one catastrophic event to move lower. It just needs too many people trying to sell before the next buyer feels urgency. Englewood is still a place people can enjoy, but right now, enjoyment is not setting the price. Supply is. Number 3 is Century Village in Pembroke Pines. Now, the story changes. Century Village in Pembroke Pines is not a beach town resale market. It is a large 55-plus condo community built around affordability, community amenities, and an active adult lifestyle. For many people, it represents a path into South Florida ownership that would otherwise be impossible. That is what makes the numbers so striking. Zillow puts the typical Century Village home value around $176,000, down 12.5% over the past year. There are nearly 300 homes listed for sale. Homes are taking around 73 days to go pending, and almost 90% of recent sales have closed below asking price. This is where the buyer pool becomes the issue. An age-restricted community cannot simply rely on every household in the county to support demand. Its next buyer has to meet the community's eligibility rules, qualify financially, accept the monthly obligations, feel comfortable with the building's condition and association documents. That is a narrower exit door. Florida's newer condo safety and reserve rules have made those documents even more important for buyers in many qualifying buildings. Again, that does not mean every building is facing a crisis, but it does mean the buyer cannot afford to ignore the fine print. Picture a retiree looking at a condo listed under $200,000. At first glance, it sounds like a bargain. Then the monthly fees appear, then the reserve study, then the inspection information, then the lender requirements, then the question of how much cash is needed after closing. The cheap purchase price can hide an expensive commitment. Century Village Pembroke Pines is not struggling because it lacks community. It is under pressure because the next buyer has to buy the whole financial package, not just the unit. Number 2 is Century Village in West Palm Beach. Century Village in West Palm Beach represents one of the clearest affordability stories in South Florida. Thousands of condos, a 55-plus community, a place where buyers who could never touch a single-family home near Palm Beach might still find an ownership opportunity. That should create a strong floor. Instead, Zillow puts the typical Century Village home value around $90,000, down 15.9% over the past year. About 349 homes are listed for sale. Homes are taking roughly 73 days to go pending, and more than 90% of recent sales are closing below asking price. That is extraordinary, because at this price point, the purchase price itself is not the whole story. It may not even be the main story. The real issue is the recurring cost of ownership, the association fee, the reserves, the building maintenance, insurance, special projects, financing restrictions, the buyer's income, the ability to pass the unit to the next qualified owner when it is time to sell. A $90,000 condo can still be unaffordable if the monthly structure is too heavy. And that is what makes older condo communities one of the most important Florida housing stories of 2026. The units may look cheap compared with the rest of South Florida, but buyers are not comparing them only against other condos. They are comparing them against renting, staying put, moving inland, moving out of state, or simply keeping cash in the bank. Century Village. West Palm Beach is not being judged on its price alone. It is being judged on whether the full cost of staying there still feels safe, and that is a much harder standard to meet. Before number one, step back. The Southwest Florida towns on this list are dealing with inventory, insurance questions, storm risk, and buyers who no longer feel urgency. The communities at the top of the list are dealing with something even more concentrated. They depend on a specific buyer, a buyer with the right age, the right income, the right financing, the right tolerance for association costs, and the confidence to buy into an older condo market. When that buyer hesitates, there is no giant pool of replacement demand waiting behind them. And that brings us to number one. Number one is Kings Point in Delray Beach. Kings Point is one of the most recognizable active adult communities in South Florida. A huge 55-plus development in Delray Beach, built around condos, amenities, golf, transportation, social life, and the promise that retirement in Florida could still be attainable. For decades, that formula worked. You sell a larger house somewhere up north, you come to Delray Beach. You trade snow for sunshine. You buy a smaller condo, join the community, and enjoy the next chapter. But Zillow now puts the typical Kings Point home value around $92,000. That is down 18.7% in 1 year, the sharpest decline in this ranking. There are nearly 400 homes listed for sale. Homes are taking about 61 days to go pending, and more than 3/4 of recent sales have closed below asking price. This is not a story about Kings Point losing its purpose. For the right resident, the community still offers something rare: a social network, services, activities, and an affordable entry point into Delray Beach. The problem is the handoff. Every owner eventually needs the next buyer, and the next buyer has to see more than a low sticker price. They have to see manageable monthly costs, financially stable associations, buildings they trust, rules they understand, a unit that can qualify for financing, and a future resale market they feel comfortable entering. That is a lot to ask from a buyer who may be living on a fixed income. The market is not saying these homes have no value. It is saying the old price structure no longer matches the new level of caution. And that is why Kings Point matters beyond Delray Beach. It is the clearest example of what happens when a market depends on a narrow buyer pool. At the exact moment the cost of ownership becomes more complicated. A low purchase price does not automatically create demand, not when the buyer is calculating the next 10 years before they even make an offer. So, what is the real lesson from these 15 Florida communities? It is not that Florida is finished. It is not that every home is about to collapse in value. And it is not that a falling price makes a town a bad place to live. The real lesson is simpler. Florida's market is becoming less forgiving. The communities that rose on easy assumptions are now being tested by hard questions. Can the buyer afford the full monthly cost? Can the building pass scrutiny? Can the seller compete with the inventory nearby? Can a second home buyer still justify the expense? Can a retiree on a fixed income safely take over the next unit? The places where those answers are hardest are seeing the pressure first. And for buyers, that can eventually create opportunity, but only for the people who understand what they are actually buying. Not just the house, not just the sunshine, the entire financial obligation attached to it. So tell me in the comments, which Florida town or community are you watching right now? Are prices actually falling where you live? Or are sellers still holding out for a number the market no longer supports? And subscribe, because the next video is going to look at the other side of this story. The Florida communities where prices may still be holding up, and why their market math is different.